It's 9:31. I'll go ahead and
Where you gotta move?
call the Henry County Technical Advisory Committee for September 10th in order. I'll go ahead and commence with roll call. Steve Bicking, or Ralph Stark. Okay. Mike Von Bergen.
Here.
Al Schmidt, or Thomas Brose. Mike Warner. Here. Jody McCarthy, Ricky Panhard. Brian Valesky. Here. Bruce Meyer, or Dan Volkers, Farm Bureau. Lori,
Here.
you can sit at
Okay.
join us. Okay, all right. You do you, no pressure. That's fine.
I'm already down.
Okay. Alex Strack.
Here.
Vince.
Here.
Mosca. Spring Duffy.
Here.
Ernest. Joyce. Darren. Fred. And then Tyler Wilkie.
Here.
All right, so we have a quorum. Okay, and then if anybody comes in late, Krista, I'll just call them out to you, okay? All right, minutes approval. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a technical issue, so the minutes did not end up in the agenda, if you guys saw that. So if there's no objection, we'll go ahead and approve. So this would be the minutes for July. So what we'll do is we'll put them on the October agenda for next month, and we'll approve the July minutes and then the September minutes if no one has any objections. Anyone? Okay, we'll go ahead and do that. All right. Well, I was hoping to jump right into a presentation from Mark Leisenberg.
Right. He says it's gonna be a few minutes late.
Few minutes? Okay, that's all right. I think this is a good opportunity to just probably do a quick summary of where we left off. With that, since we didn't meet in August, we were looking at, I reattached our working kind of revisions of our water quality section, BMP, post-construction BMP section for everyone, just to rehash. And what we were looking at was we had discussed using the Illinois Urban Manual as a guide for construction standards for BMPs. And I had proposed, and I'll pull it up here on the screen, I had proposed potentially looking at using this International Stormwater BMP database. Krista Dan Volkers is here. BMP database to put those two together for people so we can kind of identify a list of BMPs that would be appropriate for the pollutants that we're looking at. So this presentation is going to be from Mark, who has worked on this document, so he's going to give us a little bit more background on it. And kind of all of the details that went into that. He's also going to touch on, I don't want to steal all of his thunder as we wait for him to hop on here, but he's also used it with some other agencies and helped them develop some spreadsheets so that those agencies can have people use those directly to enter in their project information, meet certain targets and things like that. And I know that's where we want to go to establish some targets, and we potentially won't be able to do that until we have some assessment of the county to see really where we're at, so we can get those goals in place, let alone convince the board to move forward with certain targets. So he's going to go through that presentation, open it up to a Q&A for us to learn more, answer any questions, and then from there we can continue our discussion on moving forward and trying to figure out our BMP list. And just looking forward, one of the components that we had discussed with him was, and something that, well, if he's here, I'll hold that thought. He is.
Where is he at physically?
Mark, good morning.
Portland.
Good morning.
Can you hear us okay? Or me?
Yes.
All right. I was just giving a quick summary of your presentation, what you're going to talk about. So I think the room is kind of prepped for you if you would like to. I'll just give a quick introduction. So this is Mark with Geosyntec. He's out of the Portland office. He's been an important piece in the International BMP database. So, and Mark, you can share a little bit more with us or give your own introduction if you feel, but if, without further ado, if you're ready to go, if you want to share your screen and jump in, we can go ahead and do that.
Sure. Yeah. Hello, all. Thanks for inviting me to present today. I'm hearing a little echo. Hopefully, it's not coming through on your end.
I can mute if that helps. Let me try to mute, and then when we do Q&A, I can open it back up, or I can kind of jump in.
Okay. Thank you. It's a little distracting. So I'm a water resources and stormwater engineer in Portland, Oregon. I've been in the industry for about 23 years, focused on green infrastructure design and planning and watershed planning, and been working on the International BMP database for my entire career. And it's been a great long-term project, so I'm happy to share that with you right now. I will, let me see if I can present. Let's see, I think share my screen. And let's see, present. Let me go into presentation mode. I apologize, I can't see you all because my other screen, for some reason, stopped working, so I'm only working on one screen today. So can you all see this?
Yes.
Great. Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to give a quick introduction to the International Stormwater BMP database. This is a long-term project that Geosyntec has been involved with. We are teamed with Wright Water Engineers in Denver, Colorado, as kind of the managers of the database project. We've been supported by a coalition of sponsors over the years. The Water Research Foundation and EWRI are the current leads for the project, current funding agencies. So I'm going to give a brief intro, background on the project, and then overview of what's in the BMP database and how to retrieve data, and then provide some example data summaries that you all can access, and some applications that others have developed. And then if we have time, we could have an open discussion of how you all might want to use the database. So, as I mentioned, long-term project. It's been going on for 30 years before I got involved. Eric Strecker and Ben Urbonis presented in 1994 in Colorado to at an engineering foundation conference, and really stressed the importance of needing monitoring data to show that the stormwater BMPs that are being put in the ground are effective. And so that was kind of the birth of the idea, which was really in response to the phase 1 and phase 2 MS4 regulations that EPA was developing at the time. And just like the response was, okay, you want all these communities to put in these BMPs, but you don't know how well they work. We don't know how well they work. So let's get some data and start figuring that out. And so between 96 and 2002, EPA and the American Society of Civil Engineers collaborated to fund and build and grow the initial database. So there's a large data call, and that became kind of the birth of the database. The Water Environment Research Foundation took the lead of a sponsor coalition in 2004, and until 2024. WRF has changed their name since then, and just this year, WRF, Water Research Foundation, and EWRI of ASCE have signed a collaborative memorandum of understanding to help solicit funding and grow the database. And so that's kind of the next phase of the database for right now. But none of this would actually be possible without folks who are willing to share their data. So this is a screenshot of the BMP database. The various funding partners are on the right. There's actually been some other funding partners as well, like the Mile High Flood District in Denver. But you know, the International Stormwater BMP database is more than just a database. It actually includes other modules or other projects over the years. There's an agricultural BMP database. There's a stream restoration database, and Dr. Robert Pitt, retired from University of Alabama, had developed the Urban Stormwater Runoff Characterization database, the National Stormwater Quality Database, and we host that on the BMP database website as well. But I'm going to focus on the Urban Stormwater BMP database component. These other ones are somewhat of one-offs. They have not been funded since they originally got developed, but there is some reports and guidance that have been developed for those other modules of the database. But overall, the vision for it was to develop this kind of database, this platform that can be used towards meeting the Clean Water Act goals of having fishable and swimmable receiving waters. So how do we evaluate BMP performance? Geosyntec and Wright Water engineers developed a BMP performance monitoring guidance document in support of growing the database, and so that the data that was getting collected, it would be can be somewhat standardized and consistent. But when we think about evaluating BMP performance, there's several components. How much volume reduction is achieved? Of the runoff volume that occurs, how much is treated? So that's like the percent capture or long-term percent capture. And then of that runoff that is treated, what is the effluent quality, or the range of effluent quality that you're going to get out of the system? And then does that BMP address downstream impacts? So that could be related to the effluent quality, but it also could be related to the hydromodification and stream impacts associated with that. So the Urban BMP database has grown to about 790 performance studies, and this includes a lot more than just a percent removal database for different BMP types. When developing the database, it's very important to include metadata that documents the test sites, the locations, the land use in the watershed, and then the design of the BMP itself. And then how was the data collected? What were the methods that were used? Was there flow-weighted composite samples or grab samples collected, or time-weighted composites? And then was there any cost information associated with it? So this is a voluntary data submittal. There's standardized spreadsheets that can be used to submit data in the format needed to upload performance data sets. And then there's a variety of ways to get the data and summary statistics out, and I'll cover that in a minute here. So there's multiple different types of stormwater control measures or best management practices in the BMP database. Nomenclature has evolved over the years, and so some of it may be different than what you're used to, but we provide definitions of each of the types that are in the database, but most of them are pretty common, like grass swales and strips. Bioretention is one that's grown very quickly in the last 10 years, and as well as the manufactured devices. The manufactured devices in the last few years, we've analyzed the data. We're starting to break it down into more of the different subtypes, and it's often hard to get the manufacturers to agree that they're not a unique system, but they actually are a type of manufactured device, and we could group them. And we've worked with several manufacturers to kind of define what those subtypes are, and that's what we're showing over here in these 123 manufactured devices that are currently included in the BMP database. But there's a total of 18 general BMP categories, and we use those categories to kind of look at categorical summaries, and I'll provide some examples of that. The most recent categorical summary report was in 2020. We have data through 2023, but that's only available on the Access database that can be downloaded. So ways to access the database: there's the BMP summary reports. There's an interactive Google Earth map. Some features of the Google Earth map are limited because we've had a funding gap for the last 3 years, and so some of the website features have not been maintained. But most of it is very accessible and still works great. The online dynamic statistical analysis tool allows custom queries and summaries of different types of BMPs and pollutants. And then, of course, you could access download the Microsoft Access database and run your own queries from your desktop. So the performance summary report is probably the most popular product out of the BMP database project. It includes, like I mentioned, it was last published in 2020. This one was a fairly deep dive into literature to provide kind of some background of treatment processes and fate and transport of the different types of pollutants. It includes graphical and tabular summaries, as well as some hypothesis test results. The table below shows kind of the constituents. They're grouped into solids, bacteria, nutrients, and metals. There's certainly more pollutants than this in the database, but these are the ones that have the most data, the most commonly monitored. So those are the ones that are summarized in this report. So when we summarize the BMP performance information, we think about what are the source of the pollutants, what are the treatment processes for removing them, and then looking at the data is like how many studies are there, how many event mean concentrations. We do prefer event mean concentration data over grab sample data in the database. It's more representative of what's coming out of the BMP over a storm event rather than a single snapshot in time. There are some exceptions to that. And then what is the effluent concentration, or what is the range of effluent concentrations? And is there a difference, a statistically significant difference between the inflow and outflow? And that's where the hypothesis testing comes in to play. So here's an example of what's in that report. For metals, we identify several types of sources of metals based on some literature. We also look at fate and transport and treatment processes. So here's an example for phosphorus. We look at particulate phosphorus and orthophosphates, and what are the transformation and removal mechanisms, and then what are some of the important factors that that may impact that fate, transport, and removal of those constituents in stormwater. And then we summarize the data, and this is a example summary statistics for total phosphorus for various BMP types. We summarize the number of studies and the number of samples in here of the influent and effluent for that BMP category. We also summarize the percent of non-detects. So that's also very important for understanding how robust the data set is. If it's mostly non-detects, the information that it provides maybe is a little more limited and useful. We also include ranges of the interquartile ranges, which are the 25th and 75th percentiles of the influent effluent, as well as the medians and the 95% confidence intervals about the medians. This column on the far right is a quick way to evaluate whether the BMP in general is providing a statistically significant reduction in that pollutant. And each of them is a different test of the data. And I won't go into all the details on that. You're welcome to read it. But in general, if you've got a black solid triangle pointing down, that means that is a statistically significant difference between the influent and effluent concentrations. If it's a diamond, then it's non-conclusive. If it's a red triangle facing up, it means that there is actually export, and effluent was actually higher than influent. And in this case, what we have found is phosphorus is often exported from green infrastructure, in particular bioretention, grass strips, and swales, and that's really due to the planting media that contains phosphorus. And so a lot of researchers have now modified, or design guidance is modified to include low phosphorus concentrates and sometimes no compost. If you're gonna, unless it's a fully infiltrating system, often we're recommending including no compost in the planting media. And in Washington, the Department of Ecology just came up with a no phosphorus or no compost high rate media mix that can be used in bioretention systems. Other types of plots is like influent effluent box plots. This is somewhat of a busy plot, but once you get used to reading it, it's pretty handy. It shows the median concentrations and the confidence intervals as well as the interquartile range. It also shows the full spread of the data and any potential outliers. But what it's useful for, quickly comparing what different BMP types. And so if you say you had a requirement or a desire to get down to, say, 30 milligrams per liter, you could quickly identify the types of BMPs that can consistently achieve that. And most of them can. But the ones that tend to be the most effective are the ones that are really filtering the stormwater. So that's the bioretention systems, the media filters, this high rate biofiltration and high rate media filters. Those are all fairly effective for achieving that, as well as retention ponds, wetland basins. So it gives you a way to look at the data and compare it pretty quickly. So the BMP mapping tool, as I mentioned, there are some features that are disabled and not maintained, but that's really like these static PDFs that go along with individual studies. But this gives a nice overview of the spatial distribution of the data. And there's certainly some large gaps, and that's we're seeking to start filling some of those gaps in different climate regions of the United States and elsewhere. But there's ways to query. You could click on different of these BMP studies and get more information, and you could actually run the statistical summaries for that. And that's the main part of the analysis tool, the dynamic analysis tool. So currently there's a way to query based on the pollutant type and the BMP type and EPA rain zone. This is a map of the rain zones that was developed as part of the National Stormwater Quality Database that Dr. Robert Pitt prepared for EPA. But this query I've selected Zone 1 and retention ponds for phosphorus, and you could certainly download the data and get all the studies in an Excel spreadsheet. But you could also run this statistics and submit the data, and it'll give you a nice summary of that query. So for retention ponds, total phosphorus, and Zone 1, we have 194 influent, 182 effluent. There's been no non-detects in that data set. We show influent and effluent medians, as well as some other statistics. And over here is just a simple comparison. Are they equal, or is there an increase or decrease? But the hypothesis tests, and these are the same hypothesis tests that were portrayed in that summary report with the different symbols on the right column, at least for the first two, the Mann-Whitney and Wilcoxon. We tend to prefer non-parametric statistical tests. They're less influenced by distributional assumptions as well as other requirements for the tests. But we include t-tests as well on this. So in this case, all of them are different. So we conclude that influent and effluent for retention ponds for phosphorus in Zone 1 are statistically different, and so they're effective at reducing phosphorus. There's also these interactive plots, and these allow you, you could zoom in on different parts of the plots, but this top set is influent effluent box plots and theoretical quantile plots, so you could see at different concentrations, are we still seeing a difference? This middle one is an influent effluent scatter plot, so we're seeing that most of the concentrations are below this 1-to-1 line, indicating there is a reduction. And then we also have a time series plots, and again, you could zoom in on these plots to look at the specific storm events that were monitored. This also shows, the range of data that's contained. So, example uses of the database. There's quite a bit. It's been used by researchers, regulators, community planners, NGOs, engineers, you name it. It's got a lot of uses. One of the uses was WRF sponsored a research project called Linking BMP System Performance to Receiving Water Protections. I helped author BMP performance algorithms that included hydraulic and hydrologic algorithms, but also treatment algorithms, and the treatment algorithms were largely based on data that's contained in the International BMP database. The Mile High Flood District includes reference to the International Stormwater Database and provides some summary stats from an earlier report, I think 2010 version of the report, but use that information to prepare guidance on BMP selection and design of treatment stormwater control measures in their most recent manual. The USGS developed the SELDA model. It's a stochastic empirical loading dilution model that includes a lot of data from the BMP database. It was developed in 2013 and then updated in 2018. the National Cooperative Highway Research Program. This includes a series. I was on a team, Geosyntec was on a team that with Michael Baker and Associates and developed this guidance document. We developed these spreadsheet tools that utilized regression equations from the International Database, as well as long-term continuous simulation using EPA SWIM at hundreds of locations around the United States. And so it provides a quick way to look at BMP performance, both in terms of concentration reduction, but also volume reduction based on inputs that's provided into the tool. And this is useful. It estimates the load reductions, but it also estimates the cost per pound of pollutant removed. Just in 2021, WRF got a grant from US EPA to develop the classic community-enabled lifecycle analysis stormwater infrastructure costs tool, and that's it provides lifecycle costs for green, gray, and green gray solutions, and also includes co-benefit analysis of those. So it's a large group of researchers that developed that tool, and it's hosted on the Colorado State University's website. And finally, there is other data in the database, such as cost information, and EWRI and WRF has sponsored different reports related to that to improve tracking of cost information about BMPs and green infrastructure. So I know that was quick, it was a lot. But the Stormwater BMP database is an open access data source with many tools. There's publications. I just showed you some, but if you go on the website, there's a lot of older publications and different ways that the data have been reviewed and analyzed. The continued funding and submission of new data is an ongoing need. But we hope with this recent collaboration with WRF and EWRI that we'll be able to continue to grow and evolve the database and find new uses for it. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate your time. So with that, I'll open it up to the group. If anybody has a question, comment. Brian, go ahead and start us off.
Hey, Mark, it's Brian. A couple of simple questions here. What are the rules and restrictions of data? I mean, you have to assume that these facilities are operating, right? They're being maintained. There must be some restrictions on who, what, when, and can submit data and how they validate it.
Yeah, and there's guidance on and protocols for submitting data to the database. We typically want a minimum number of storm events, influent and effluent storm events for the BMP. Like I said, event mean concentrations are preferred, but grab samples will be accepted, particularly for like retention basins or where you have a large volume and the influent and effluent may not, the timing of the EMC may not be as important as for grab samples. But we'll take any of the data, review it, and provide, it's like I said, the metadata is also important. So we need design information, we need watershed information, we need to have information about the size of the storm event. So the rainfall data as well is important for all of that. So it's a bit of a lift, but once you kind of get, I've done it a couple of times. It's a pretty streamlined process. Like the Mile High Flood District has long-term BMPs that they monitor, and they submit data to the database every year.
So a question, So thanks for doing all the research. But let's say for a kind of a practical application that we have a site and we want to pull a design out of this database and kind of get a, I don't know, boilerplate kind of design detail. How, does this database do that for you? Or could you explain that?
Well, we do, some of the features that have been disabled on the web tool include like design schematics. These BMPs are designed, everybody's following a different design manual. So the designs are not standardized in this in any way. But that's why we want to have that information. We need to know what the design storm was that was used for sizing it. What is the storage volume of the BMP? So that information is available. So you can dig into the metadata for a particular BMP study. We've done that in the past where we've looked at, what are some of the factors that may be influencing the performance. But it's a lot more than just the design. And so, trying to tease that out it can be a challenge because it's the watershed, it's the storm size and the storm characteristics, it's as well as the design and the influent quality all impact, how well a BMP performs. And of course the maintenance, as Brian just said. So a lot of that is documented, but this is not intended to be a design guidance tool. It's to provide support for making decisions related to the design or selection of different stormwater control measures.
Do you have any perspective on long-term performance? Since the database is 30 years old, there's some 30-year-old detention basins out there or bioswales or whatever it might be of through time. Because one of the concerns, if you will, in the industry is that after 10 years it doesn't work anymore and has to be rebuilt, which is a scary and expensive endeavor. But do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, we've looked at it a little bit, but to be honest, there's only a few studies where we have the long-term data sets for. A lot of these studies get submitted, after a monitoring period that may last 3 years, 3 to 5 years most usually, sometimes less than that. There's not many people are funding long-term monitoring studies. And so, except for I mentioned the Mile High Flood District, which is really why they're funding that, is because they want to see how these perform over time and how they are impacted by the maintenance activities that are done.
Go ahead, Scott.
I had a few questions, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to kind of ask questions about things that appear to be absent from the database, and thinking that the reason they're not included may help us inform us on how we want to approach certain things. So one of the things that I didn't see, at least it didn't jump out at me, is it doesn't look like you have data regarding oil and grease. You have metals, but I don't see anything regarding parking lot runoff, trucking facility runoff, which would be big concerns of ours. Is there a reason why that was not included?
Mostly the oil and grease data is mostly grab sample data. That's part of it. So there's not a lot of oil and grease data, but there is total petroleum hydrocarbon data, and we have analyzed that in the past. I've been on projects for the National Cooperative Highway Research Program where that was very important parameter, and so we do have data and it is available. And we actually looked at it with different traffic, average daily traffic as well, and so that is in the database. There was a one-off tool that was developed for state departments of transportation that really focused on some of those parameters and looking at traffic as an indicator of influent quality.
Okay. And then we're concerned with groundwater quality in our area. We're 100% groundwater dependent. We have a lot of sand and gravel, so very porous soils. So concerned about potential water quality issues regarding groundwater infiltration. The USGS and the EPA are looking much more closely now at BMP basins, detention basins in particular, being sources of pollutants, because we've concentrated all the pollutants into that water body and create a situation where it can leach over long periods of time. Have you looked into groundwater quality as in relation to these BMPs?
That is not a data set that we're actually collecting for these BMPs. We do have like infiltration type facilities, and we report volume loss for those, but not tracking, the monitoring of the groundwater below. That's kind of a special study, and it's something that could certainly be considered in the future, but it's not something a lot of researchers are doing right now.
Okay. Yeah, and like I said, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but these are important questions. And then, this is a little off topic maybe, but one of the things that we're going to be looking at are the role of forebays, incorporating forebays into detention basins and other features. I don't see any reference to forebays in your data. Is that a BMP that you do have data on that's just not in the published version?
Yeah, there is in the BMP database, like the design parameters, and most detention basins have a forebay in it. So only a few studies have like intermediate sampling, where they would sample, after a forebay but before the main body. So there are some of those where we actually have treatment trains in the database, but a lot of the retention ponds and detention basins do actually have forebays because it's part of a design standard in most places.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those were the questions I had.
Sure.
Anyone else? Darren.
Thanks so much for the presentation. Just curious, how do you find most people are using this data?
It's widely varied, actually. Like I mentioned, a lot of graduate students are using it for their dissertations. We've had regulators in California have used it to, dictate what needs to be removed for meeting a total maximum daily load. The Mile High Flood District used it for selecting BMPs. We also did a project for Ohio Department of Transportation where we used the data to also use it for actually BMP selection, for different types of constituents. So yeah, I think there's endless possibilities on what it's being used for, but I think those are probably the most common use cases.
Thank you.
I guess one last thing, as far as creating a spreadsheet that we can use as part of an ordinance, I guess we would just take the raw data and do it ourselves. Is there assistance that the Water Quality Association or the host organization can provide as far as helping us develop individualized sheets or spreadsheets that can be used?
There is some limited support. As I mentioned, we actually have no funding right now. So they have entered a collaborative agreement, but there's no funding at the moment to provide support. We actually have a backlog of data that needs to be uploaded, and some tool maintenance that needs to be done. So I can't say that a lot of support, because the team is Wright Water Engineers, Geosyntec Consultants. WRF and EWRI are just partners in helping to find funding, which they still need to do.
Okay, funding's important. Point taken.
So Mars, Brian, again, I imagine that a lot of those opportunities, though, are potentially they're done through sponsors or grant opportunities.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And if you're following the EPA's Stormwater Centers of Excellence, EPA is going to put a lot of money into these research centers, and we've been collaborating with several of those because they're interested in helping grow the database as well, because they see it as an important tool for helping communities like yourselves, utilize that data and make decisions, make sound decisions with regard to the BMPs that are being implemented to meet their MS4 requirements. So, yeah, so there should be. I'm expecting some grants coming out of those stormwater centers of excellence, specifically for the BMP database and to help communities enter data and utilize the data.
But if McHenry County was interested in developing their own tool, there's nothing from stopping McHenry County themselves from applying for a grant to develop this tool in any way, shape, or form they see fit for their ordinance.
That absolutely. That's the data is completely open source. Yep.
I had a question about the long-term or even the ongoing maintenance for the BMPs. Is that included in the metadata exactly what these people are doing with the BMPs on a yearly basis or whatever frequency it is?
They are, if there's studies that are ongoing, we will add that information, but a lot of these studies are, like I said, are funded, and then the research is done and then they move on, so we don't really have that long-term connection with the O&M. But that certainly is a major focus, and I don't know if you all attend the EWRI O&M conference, but that's a great conference that talks a lot about the importance of maintenance and different research that's going around that kind of topic.
Anyone else? All right. Well, Mark, I want to thank you again for giving your time to us and walking us through this. And,
So you can get a copy of the PDF?
Yes, if you don't mind sending me a copy of your presentation, I'd like to send it to the group.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
And then, yeah, so with that, I think you're free to go now.
Thanks for your 30 years of work on this.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you all. Take care.
Bye, Mark.
Thank you.
All right.
His comment about the compost, something that when I learned that years ago, which I think I mentioned, it's kind of a kick in the head, here you're trying to do a good thing, and then you end up being a pollution source instead of a sink. But I think MWRD requires the use of biosolids.
Yeah, we just had that conversation with them.
So they're requiring the project to put in a water quality source, a water quality problem source in their facilities.
Especially
which is
if
kind
you're
of
thinking PFAS and microplastics and other things.
yeah, all of that, right? So it's kind of interesting. I don't know.
This does go into detail about the compost. So the PDF of the published version of this was emailed to everybody. And it does go into detail about the compost issue.
The Wisconsin guys figured that out. So
I mean, if we want to have kind of some follow-up discussions regarding the databases I kind of mentioned, we'd like to try to use this if everyone agrees that this is, a good tool for assessing which BMPs we want to identify for certain pollutants, and then work to pair that with something like the Illinois Urban Manual, but then dig into some of those details to potentially add additional guardrails, whether it's composting for bioretention or kind of other design elements that we want to incorporate and include that as part of this. And so what we're hoping this will look like is kind of a step one, short of then developing our own tool for individual projects and having goals. This will help set up the foundation. So as part of our ordinance rewrite, we are looking at having an identification of those pollutants that then, you know, a helpful guide, whether it's an appendix or something that someone can go to a list, choose that BMP, and then follow the criteria for the design. Now, obviously, someone can submit other data or resources to indicate that potentially a BMP might be helpful in that process, and that can be reviewed, and we can include that in there, that it's not limited to this. This is just kind of sets up the minimum standards. But that was kind of staff's idea to help with that first step and have something. And the other component that we're going to be looking at too is also providing some guidance for folks that might not understand what their pollutant sources are. So some resources from the EPA and things like that. So if you have a trucking facility, you know, what are some of the sources of pollutants? So then we kind of hit all the phases of identifying the pollutants. We've identified the BMPs and, you know, established those guidelines.
So one of the resources that Storm was just mentioning is the EPA's industrial stormwater fact sheets. I'm just curious, is anybody familiar with the EPA's industrial stormwater fact sheets?
I think you said
So it's a great resource. So they use the standard industrial codes, SIC codes, and then identify the different pollutants associated with that industry, the source of the pollutants, and then the BMPs that can be implemented to mitigate those pollutant sources. And so it's, you know, each of these are, nonprofit, reliable data that we can refer to without having to reinvent the wheel. And so, you know, if you have a trucking facility, you can look and see what the different pollutant types, sources can be that are associated with that plant, industrial use, and, you know, narrow in what should be focused on, as opposed to guesswork. So I think each of these can be powerful tools in helping the regulated community identify what they need to do quickly and reliably. But this is, we'll send a link out to this. This is something that I think many people in this room probably should be aware of just as part of their own day-to-day business. But I think this will be a really powerful tool for us to include for the stormwater management moving forward.
I had a question about chlorides. So that was kind of sidestepped in the database. You know, out west, they don't really use that, so it's not something they're concerned about, but I know we're highly concerned in McHenry County because of the impact to groundwater. So there's no BMPs that work for that, right? You just have to reduce the use.
That's, you need to reduce it. And so one of the things that I've been involved in is developing, and this is driven by the Conservation Foundation. They took the ball and ran with this and got EPA funding to implement it. But we've created a Salt Smart training and certification program for parking lots and sidewalks. Most municipalities are doing some form of sensible salting. So the greatest way that we can reduce chloride pollution is actually on parking lots and sidewalks.
Yeah.
So this program is now up and running. And so ideally what we'd like to move to is actually having requirements for certified contractors.
I remember we had this discussion a while back and you were also pursuing something at the state level with regard to statutory change.
Right. So that's the first step. So the first step was creating a regional manual that we could all be working off of. The second step was creating a training and certification program. The third step is having municipalities and other organizations adopt those requirements. And then the fourth phase is, once that's established, using that as a foundation for state legislation that provides liability protection for property owners that hire certified contractors that are properly implementing Salt Smart practices. And so with that liability protection, that's going to use economic forces to drive the change. Because if that's one of the big drivers of going crunch, crunch, crunch from your car to the store is liability concerns. Yeah. And so if we can address liability concerns If a property owner has a choice between ACES certified service that provides liability protection and Billy Bob's snowplow service that doesn't, they're going to go with ACE every time. And so the market will actually drive the reduction in chlorides.
Yeah, because the store owners don't want your feet touching the pavement, they just want you kind of skating on top of the salt.
Yeah.
Well, what's the status of the state legislation, anything?
We have not moved that forward. We're looking at Wisconsin. So Wisconsin has their Saltwise program, and it got through state house and got voted down by like 1 or 2 votes, something like that. I mean, it was really close.
Okay.
I'm pretty frustrated with the rationale behind voting it down, but we do think that Wisconsin is going to do it again and we'll pass it next time. And I think that'll then create a solid legal precedent that we can then rely on.
Vince.
What's that?
I didn't get a chance to vote.
Good job, Vince.
We are a swing state. So.
It was kind of interesting who voted against it. It was actually people you would not expect to be voting against it. So, but that's the status. We have not developed the state legislation for that yet. We just got the program up and running, but that will be the foundation for state legislation.
Thanks.
The MS4, anyone involved in any of the sampling for MS4 communities, does the sampling itself have any teeth? I mean, because I could see you sampling in January on a detention basin or some kind of outfall and have 2,000 parts chloride, which would technically be a water quality violation. Does it, I mean, is it just voluntary and just is there
If there's
as an entity?
if there's a TMDL associated,
There are no
with it,
chloride TMDLs developed yet.
what's it?
I don't believe there are.
For North Branch.
North Branch has one.
Yeah,
So
Well, I don't know, it's impaired, it doesn't have a TMDL.
I think it's held up by this time-limited water quality standard.
Okay.
That the EPA has recognized that there's legal challenge to it by the Chicago area waterways. So they've come to a detente, I guess, with EPA where they've held up enforcing it.
Okay.
So, but yeah, the North Branch Watershed Work Group samples a lot.
But I'm just wondering what if you have an excursion? Is it just a fact, or is there, an actual enforcement that comes from it? My comment is related to, there could be a lot of those. You could have every parking lot in Lake Forest or, Matawa or wherever, pick Mariano's in Bannockburn, one of our projects. We had an issue with getting an individual permit through IEPA for water quality certification because it was an impaired water downstream. So we were going from basically 0 chloride as a nursery to a parking lot. Well, it's kind of hard to limit your loading increases when you go from 0, right? So, but probably discharges a lot of chloride in the wintertime. So I'm just kind of curious what happens with that data if it does get collected, because it would seem like you're self-monitoring and then.
I think you are self-monitoring. I think the only danger with the data is if you are supposed to collect it and you don't. That's
Okay.
probably when the IEPA would come after you. But I think that like North Branch and some communities do it themselves. They're collecting the data with in-stream data and they just report on it at the end of every year and they've met the requirement.
We have a program, so this is actually from the same organization that developed the Riverwatch program. They have a chloride watchers program, and we're working with the Conservation Foundation once again. So it's a pretty easy citizen science program to be part of. And they'll provide you a filter strip for each month from, I think, October through March. In McHenry County, we're going to purchase additional test strips so people participating in the program can test as much as they want, because it really is interesting. I'll go out before a storm and sample the Kishwaukee River and then Silver Creek right by my house, and then test during a storm, test after a storm, and so you are watching that curve rise and fall and gathering that data. It's purely for informational purposes, but if anybody's interested, we're going to have, I think it's October 30th will be our training date.
There's a test strip for chloride?
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
They're fairly pricey, but it's really easy to use. Just have a little simple container, gather your sample, pour it in, sit the test strip in, and 3 minutes later, you've got your reading. And you just need to convert it from the test strip's numeric system to parts per million. Really pretty easy to do. So anybody interested in citizen science, or if you have municipalities that would like to do this as part of their MS4 program, that's actually who I'd really like to be targeting, is having municipalities, do this as part of participate in this as part of their MS4 program. Because one of the MS4 requirements is not just public outreach, but providing opportunities for the public to get involved. And that's the toughest category to actually meet. And so by municipalities promoting this, they can get credit for that minimum control measure, and then also get the public involved in citizen science. So anybody interested in that, let me know, and once I get my flyer and everything put together, I'll send that out.
Send it out.
But it is voluntary, it's not a requirement.
All right, really great discussion. So I'm going to try to keep this moving, and I think if no one has kind of anything else, I think what we'll do here is kind of moving forward is maybe we'll have staff maybe sift through some of this data and come back to you guys and indicate some of the BMPs that maybe we'd like to see being used for the different sources of pollutants, and maybe try to compile some of the accompanying Illinois Urban Manual construction standards and just briefly show what those are and kind of help facilitate the discussion to potentially develop our own little appendix or guide that anybody can kind of follow. So if that, yes?
One last thing, as they're going on that, DuPage County did do something similar. It's probably pretty dated now, but that may be a good template to look at, because it talks about
Do you know what
regulations.
it's called? Is it in their ordinance or is it something
It's
separate?
Appendix E of their it's Water Quality Best Management Practices Technical Guidance, Appendix E of their Stormwater and Floodplain Ordinance.
Great. We'll take a look, and if we've got a head start, don't need to reinvent the wheel.
They use it pretty regularly.
Okay.
So maybe it seems like it's been effective.
Awesome.
Well, and along those lines, you've commented on the difficulty of complying with the DuPage County ordinance. As far as that goes, as a regulated community, is that something you've been able to utilize?
Well, I think the problem with their ordinance is they require these things on like the smallest of projects. And so if somebody's putting in a 3,000 square foot, addition to a yard or something, they're making them comply with this. I don't think we're not asking people to do that. We're looking at doing this for either larger developments or ones that are, clearly are adding pollutants to the watershed. They are applying it. In my view, they apply it to everybody, which is not what I'm recommending.
Yeah, the language in here, and again, we'll circle back. A lot of this language excludes our general permits. Our general permits are like your patios and your decks, and then it includes the single-family residences and those type of developments. So now there could be some kind of unique situations, and maybe we can include some language to maybe be aware of that. But yeah, as you mentioned, it is meant for those other cases.
Thank you for the distinction.
All right, well, with that, I'll move into 5.2, which is based on something that we were discussing previously for the conflict between the exemptions in the ordinance and whether or not it's a general permit. So what I tried to do, and I apologize, there's a typo in there, but what I tried to do is highlight the three cases. So maintenance of existing roads and bridges. This is incorrect, number 2. It's this one here, minor modifications of culverts, storm sewers, and drain tiles. I'll go ahead and update that. I'll get it to Krista to upload the correction there. We'll go through that process to have that corrected. But if you're following along, if you want to note that, it is correct in the language, but that's the second one. And then the dredging is the third one, which includes, we've discussed this, which will include ponds, and then the whole issue with the drainage ditch channel ditch whole component. So basically what I did was I went to SMC, we talked about this last time. They were in favor of having something in place where people come to us to have some kind of plan looked at, as opposed to moving everything completely towards an exemption status. So with that in mind, what I tried to do here was revisit and just highlight the general permit, the language here in red, and really highlight the same information in the exempted development definition. So what it's meant to show is really that the red is pretty much identical. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, we can kind of go through that, but because of that identical nature, really, the proposal here would be to remove the exemption definition and keep the general permit, and see if the commission would want to grant a resolution to waive the permit fee for that specific general permit. I don't know if they'd be open to that, but there is precedence because they've done that with fencing. And, you know, looking at the long list of general permits here, we're not talking about the majority. So that would be the proposal to them that I would want to see if anybody has any comments or discussion or concerns, anything of that nature. So the idea here would be we would issue a permit for this. And so the idea of, and I was hoping that Ernest would be here from a DOT perspective, but with the maintenance of existing roads and bridges, it's not for new bridges, and this would potentially include the pavement over existing bridges, so replacing that. So we would still require anyone looking to do this to come in for a permit. So that way we get the site plan on file in case there are any issues. But it would be free of charge. Mike?
So we had this happen with us in the drainage district now. We went through that and it seemed to work fairly well. We had a permit in a day. Does that exempt the townships too?
It would, well, as a tax collecting body, they would automatically be exempt from any permitting fees.
For the fees, but you still have to come in and get the, so if we're gonna fix a bridge and do an overlayment on the bridge.
Under this condition, yes, we would request that they give us a site plan. So I think from the perspective of the townships, knowing them, they're probably gonna have something in place, right? Because they gotta contract it out, so.
Usually it's the county does that anyways for the townships.
Right, so usually they're gonna have something in file, and with working with Ernest, he's probably sent me about a dozen emails of replacement projects where they weren't certain where they wanted to run it by me anyway, and it's been along the maintenance. So it seems like most of these guys are already in the process of kind of making sure and sending it in. So it's not gonna be an unusual ask, I wouldn't say. It's not gonna be a huge change from how DOT and some of these folks already operate. But it would, I think from their perspective, what really this is gonna close the loophole on is any kind of private areas that are looking to do this, where it could be a concern if a neighbor calls. It's not uncommon for us to get phone calls about the neighbor bringing in trucks or doing work. So if we have something on file, this would be much easier for us, as well as giving information to the public. And it usually turns into a he said this and they said that, and sometimes it's hard to make heads or tails. And so this might help in those scenarios as well, but those are minor. we don't see those a lot. But they're also hiring folks. We get those phone calls too. The amount of paving companies that probably call us just to double check. It's almost like everybody just does it anyway, just to make sure they're covered. So, yeah.
So I'm sorry, so this is now going to require a permit for any roadway maintenance project, is that correct?
Yes.
But it could get a general permit.
It would have always been covered under a general permit, yeah.
So can I just summarize what I thought I heard? So this first section is going to be a part of the general permit number 1, but not the whole general permit.
So this general permit 1 section, I pulled directly out of the ordinance, so I'm not suggesting anything be changed in here.
Okay, so then you're adding the definition for exempted development.
I added that for comparison, so you could see that basically when it talks about existing maintenance of roads, it talks about rehabilitative maintenance. In the GP1, it says the same thing. The milling and overlaying, again, same thing.
Right.
Outside of flood hazard. So the language is pretty much identical.
But there's no current definition for exempted development, or is that a section?
No, it is, yeah, it's in the ordinance where.
Okay, it's not in the definition section.
Yeah, it's not. It's just when you follow the ordinance under Article 1C, it says exempted developments, and in there it'll start listing them, and a lot of them are listed under this definition principle. But
Gotcha.
because you have this matching nature, I don't know which came first, if they were both put in there and someone just didn't catch, like, hey, we're putting the same thing, we're exempting it, but then we're requiring a general permit. Which one should we go for? And so I think out of this group too, everyone seemed to like the idea that we want to get something on file. That's kind of how the board saw it, so that's why I'm suggesting that then we would eliminate this definition from the exemptions, keep the general permit, and move to have a resolution passed to waive the fees if they want, since there's that conflict between the two.
I was confused because don't you normally show the stuff to remove as strikeout? So you want to strike that out, right, the definition?
Yeah, this was not like I'm not presenting like a final rewrite here.
Okay.
Yeah, this was just meant for a representative purpose,
Gotcha.
and then I didn't want to do all the work, and then you guys say we don't like that proposal, let's do something else.
Okay.
But that would be, basically when you look at, so I'd pull up the exemption section and I would strike this out as the revision. Is how it would work.
Okay, the only comment that I've seen that has come up is like resurfacing a roadway within flood-prone areas. So, and it would have been good to have Ernest here about how that resurfacing normally happens, but it could be a township too. There's a lot of times they'll go in and just put a 4-inch overlay over the road. And we've had situations where that 4 inches, backs water up on the person upstream.
I've had a lot of those calls too, and I think something like this, it clearly says that the difference in elevation, so that's something we can look at. It says no more than 2 inches.
For flood fringe, but it doesn't say that in the flood prone.
Yeah, so these are connected if we look at these definitions. Really, it is implying that for flood prone areas that it's calling the flood fringe, that you can do that with, if it's more than 2 inches. And this, by having this a permit, it would allow us to review that and take a look. And if it doesn't fit this definition, all we would do is just move it to a regular permit.
Gotcha.
So at that point, we say you're looking to raise the profile, maybe we want the hydraulics to show that you're not gonna cause flooding on a neighbor. But we've been dealing with those phone calls a lot as well, that, hey, the township just came in and raised the elevation of the road and I've never been flooding and now I am getting some water backing up, so. Yeah.
How about expanding shoulders with gravel, or would that fall within this?
I would probably think it would be within that, because it is still an impervious area. So if there's an existing shoulder and you wanted to maintain that, then this would work. If you wanted to expand beyond that, then I think you're moving away from the general permit into more of a regular permit, because maybe that shoulder expansion is up next to a wetland, or it's in a flood hazard area, so now you have to deal with comp storage.
So I guess my question is, that standard maintenance on, graveling the shoulders, shouldn't that be exempt? Or should they have to go and get a permit in order to do that?
Well, so all of this now would require a permit. But before, I will say, both of these existed. What we've seen, at least from my time here, is that a lot of our townships, roadways, DOTs, whether it was maintenance, were coming in and submitting this information for permitting. A lot of the time, we permitted it under the general permit one, if we could.
Okay.
Very few cases where we did not. And a lot of the times, it would, one example that I'm thinking of was where we couldn't waive the fees. It was some kind of charity group using funds, and I think we looked at calling it maintenance, where it was, again, which one do you exempt it, or do you do the general permit? And I think in that case, because they were trying to stretch every dollar, it made sense to give them the opportunity to do that, to use that money that way. But in this case, we would be able to waive their fees along with government agencies.
I think for like typically MFT programs that everybody does each year where you're resurfacing roads and you're adding new gravel shoulders, there's no plan and profile, there's no survey, there's the typical section. That's basically it. That's all you're gonna see in the bids. When you put a bid out, you give them the extent of the project in the typical, and then describe the job and the specifications. So I don't know if you're ever gonna see something where you're getting like a floodplain map per se, or a flood-prone area map, or anything overlaid on, that's not part of the current projects. So I guess that's something that's gonna need to be added so you can see where things are going, and then you're gonna have to know profile adjustments within those areas if there is gonna be, some surface added, because a lot of times you wanna bring the surface up a little bit and then add the aggregate on the sides and then compact it down so it's flush and, continues to operate. But you don't wanna be, if you mill everything down and then resurface it, your aggregate's not gonna get compacted properly on the sides unless you go through and remove the aggregate or push it into the ditches.
Well, I think if someone's coming under this general permit, I think they're generally indicating that they're gonna be maintaining their elevations and that nature. So I don't know, depending on what they're proposing, then potentially that might be something we want to see. But I think in general, this was intended, and this isn't going to include your smaller projects, so everyone with the driveway isn't gonna be getting a permit because it's not gonna exceed the thresholds. So this is for larger projects of roadway, but I think this was looked at as trying to be quick from the point of view that they are just going to, for all intents and purposes, resurface and keep the same elevations. So if we had a document and that's what they were proposing in the area, and a lot of times with these general permits, we would take pre-pictures and post-pictures, but to your point, you're right, we really wouldn't be able to go back out there and understand, did they hit their tube more than 2 inches or not? I think that would be something that, again, based on the information and what's provided to us, we'd have to kind of take it at face value. Unless we ask for that additional information that you're mentioning and get into all of that. My only concern is that it gets so complicated, I don't even know that I myself would be able to necessarily review it properly, or staff, or, you know, keep it consistent.
Yeah. I mean, because you're really never gonna mill it and keep the surface elevation of the road the same. You always wanna add surface, so you compact it and you get your aggregate on the shoulders, you know, added and compacted, and it's matching up with your new surface elevation.
Well, I think that's why this has the no more than 2 inches built into it. But if we want to take a closer look at maybe adding some language for that, then we certainly can, but it's not something that I was thinking of. That's why I mentioned I was hoping Ernest would be here to provide some more insight into some of this, to see if we're missing something. So if we want, we can kind of, because there's 2 more to talk about, but I can send this to Ernest to see if he has any feedback, and I can pull this one and bring it back to address any of those points or concerns of continuing to increase the pavement height, especially to the situations you guys brought up.
Could I suggest a word change instead of limitations? Could you put the word exceptions? Isn't that what you?
Tell me where.
The end of the first sentence, number 1, or second sentence, sorry.
Here,
Yeah.
limitations?
Don't you mean these, you can increase the surface elevation except for these following areas? That's what you mean, right? Or, I'm not sure, because limitations, I'm not following that exactly.
Well, we can change it to parameters or something.
So you can resurface outside of flood hazard areas and increase the elevation as much as you want.
Right.
Correct.
And you can resurface within flood prone areas and increase or not increase.
Well, that's where the flood prone areas with the flood fringe, I think maybe we'd have to look at that number 2 and number 3, because it does, this idea of the flood fringe is talking about flood prone,
Maybe
but it's
combine those.
outside of the floodway. Really what it's saying is you can do the 2 inches outside of the floodway.
So could you say flood prone or
Yeah,
flood
I'll
fringe?
take a look at both of them,
And the other issue, I guess, with all these MFT projects in every township, every municipality, you know, has MFT each year, as nobody knows what a flood-prone area is unless they go in and do a delineation on a map. Because isn't that any area over 100 acres of linear, basically, if it's got 100 acres of tributary, it's not even an SFHA.
100 acres trib would be floodway.
Maybe it's over 20 acres, flood prone.
Well, I'll pull up the flood prone.
That's, I got a question on that.
Dan, did you have something similar?
I was just curious of the defining factors, so you hit exactly what I was wondering about.
So here is flood prone.
So 100 acres of tributary area isn't necessarily anything that's gonna show up on an SFHA map. So you need to pull out a tributary map, a USGS map or something for everybody that ever does a road program. MFT, spending money for MFT is gonna need to delineate the watersheds for the roads that they plan on doing. To know whether or not it's in a flood prone area, to know whether or not it's got over 100 acres of tributary area.
Correct, or they can approach us and ask us to take a look at that.
Because I don't even know how many are done, I guess, whatever number of townships, plus the county,
But I
plus
think
every
it's,
municipality.
I think it's important to note, though, that the tributary area is not necessarily like gonna be flowing through the entire road network, right?
Right, but you need to delineate it. I mean, all these guys are doing now is just putting together some Word documents with a typical section and a map. A location map for the contractor to say, we want this road resurfaced from here to here. Here's the typical, you know, and here are the specifications.
Yeah,
And they bid it.
I mean, it's whether, I guess what I'm saying here is that it's always been in the ordinance, whether it's been a general permit or an exemption, it's always been in there for them to, you know, to figure out. Now, if they don't know, that's not necessarily then the world, they can send it into us, we can take a look at that.
I just think it's gonna be problematic.
Well, but I guess to my point, though, it's always been in the ordinance. So it's not something new that, like, none of this, none of what I'm proposing in the language that you're seeing, like, we can dive into that, and maybe potentially this is an issue for people to do, but it's been in existence until now. So I'm not introducing something new for someone to do.
But if it was exempted before, then they probably never did it.
They're not coming in.
Right.
I guess that's my question. Have you ever had a violation or flagged anybody that should have come in for a GP1 permit that was doing road maintenance?
Yeah.
I mean, is that an often thing? And I guess what issues?
Depends on the township.
Flood hazard, flood prone.
What did you flag? What was the violation there?
Typically neighbors calling that there's work being done, so we would go out, and then it would be one of those where they are claiming maintenance, but they're introducing new storm sewer or.
You see a lot of shoulder widening as part of maintenance. I see it all the time.
Which, again, if shoulder widening is a component, we can incorporate it into the language if it makes sense. And again, but we'd probably have to designate that it's outside of the flood hazard area. And
But you can now go to, well, you could do it before, you could raise the profile of the road by 2 inches.
under this in the floodplain, yeah.
So if I'm doing a culvert, right, and I've got a 100-acre depression drained to a 15-inch culvert, right, whether that culvert's being maintained or who knows what state that culvert's in, maybe that's part of the project, maybe it's not, and I've raised the profile of the road and this thing already ponds behind that culvert, I'm just thinking, you know, if I have a farm field there, that could easily inundate another 20 acres, you know, depending on how flat it is. So I mean, it can have ramifications.
It's a fair point. We can, like I said, we can look at then eliminating the 2-inch requirement and modifying the language itself as
I
well.
mean, I'm not trying to make it harder for the DOT, the job's hard enough, but, you know, there's a potential issue there with the farm,
Yeah.
the farming community.
I mean, we've had those phone calls with people that when the roads have been repaved, yeah, they sometimes, and sometimes it's not 2 inches, sometimes it's greater. And they're trying to, they try to use the maintenance criteria, and I just don't have any ability to, I don't know what it was before, to indicate that, hey, this fell outside of maintenance, you raised it more than 2 inches. Type of concern.
So my question is, it's above, it's maintaining existing roads and bridges. In the exempted, it's existing roads and trails. So, and we made a comment before, it's not gonna affect driveways. Some of these farms have got a 1/4 mile gravel road on them, right? We're not talking about milling. But in order to maintain on the frost heave, they send out 8 semi-loads of stone, you know, and get them flattened back out, take all the potholes out of it, before they'd be exempted development. But now it's gonna need a GP1 permit, right, or no? I guess that's my,
Yeah, but in some of those cases, people have been coming in and getting GP1 permits when it's exceeded 5,000 square feet. Generally, staff's history with this now that we have it side by side, that we have the conflict, the history has been that if it's been under 5,000 square feet, we've normally exempted it because it's under 5,000. Anything greater, we've generally looked to issue a general permit.
With no increase in,
Well, that's the criteria though, that's the criteria we have them hold, is you go ahead and add 8 tons of your gravel, just make sure you're not increasing the elevations by more than 2 inches, or make sure you're maintaining the same elevations. That's basically the history. If you go back and look at some of these older permits, how they've been carried out. So in this case, we would want to see that, so they would need to bring and just show, I'm gonna be doing this gravel drive and restoring it and keeping the same elevation, and a simple, site plan and document and indicating. And that's why I'm saying if someone comes in for this general permit, we'd be taking it at face value. Right, because I'm not gonna be able to go out there and confirm that they went 3 inches as opposed to 2.
Right, but if there's a flooding issue, then that suddenly gets escalated.
Right, yes, that could be something that comes up, and that's why I think the recourse would be that we'd want to go out, take some before pictures, and then have some after pictures, and hopefully be able to have some identifies there. Otherwise, we'd have to make this process more complicated with some of these individual components that everyone is bringing up.
Is there an emergency component at all? So let's say a farmer, we have a huge rain event and destroys their gravel driveway and they need to get their equipment in and out. Is there an emergency type situation?
I think, if someone came in and said, hey, I did this work because I needed to, we do have that along the lines of if someone's house has a fire and they need to repair their roof right away. We allow them to move forward with the work, but still would like them to come in and show us what they've done.
Like after the fact?
So yeah, in those emergency situations, the department has operated under that criteria of, yes, please do what you need to, there's life safety, or you need to get your equipment out, there's, all of those factors. But come back and, get the permit for it if needed. And that would be something that we have looked at for roadways where people would be proposing gravel, and we've indicated to them, no, this section is gonna wash out, we'd like you to do something different, and have fought us on it. So by having the plan, we can potentially look at some of that, and even though we might not be able to require it, we can at least give it out as a recommendation, which we tend to do as well. Whether people listen to us, some do, some don't.
Going back to the flood-prone area discussion, and you mentioned that you've had departments bring in plans that, they were just submitting it just to double check. Have you ever reviewed any of those and gone, oh no, you are in a flood-prone area?
Potentially, yeah. I think the big thing with the 100-acre strip too is it triggers floodway. So at that point, we're also mindful of getting IDNR involved to make sure that they're not going to have any issues. But yes, typically we do for permitting purposes, we check the tributary area on pretty much all of our permits if it's not already provided.
That's like 640 for IDNR OWR.
Okay.
100 acres is just McHenry County. It's a square mile. So I think that, I'm just saying there's no way that you're gonna see, you're gonna have to delineate these tributary areas. You can't even look at the SFHA. I think it's creating like a big can of worms, it's gonna add a lot of extra work.
The tool that we use is USGS. It's a simple tool, and you can delineate a quick tributary area with no problem.
Like on stream stats.
Yeah, it's not 100%.
Well, there's tools, so StreamStats has a limitation where you have to have the blue line.
Right.
There's other online tools, I believe, that you don't have to have that. You just to pick a point, it should be able to delineate.
But we're hoping like with the way we want to move forward with some of our GIS and components, like Kane County has done that, where you can click on a map, see the drainage feature and everything, that we can provide some of these online tools to help down the road. Because it's in the ordinance now, so I understand that some people might struggle. So we are mindful of some of these limitations and hope to have some tools available to make it easier and quicker for people that, you know, need to use it on a regular basis. But we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So, you know, we can, like I said, to kind of move along, I'd like to, I don't know how everyone feels about removing the exempted development and moving forward. We can also just run through everything, and maybe I'll open it up to the group for a vote to see if you guys want me to bring it back and incorporate some more thoughts, send it to Ernest to get some feedback.
Yeah, I'd like to get Ernest's input, given that he's DOT. It seems like this is, to Steve's point, this is gonna have potentially pretty large impact on
I agree.
DOTs.
I was hoping he'd be here, so.
I do want to echo Steve's concern, though. I mean, those type of MFT projects, you'd have to then see all of them, and that could have a big impact on those that are putting them together.
I don't, do you know the relative, I mean, how much maintenance of roadway are these? Are they miles and miles?
Typically.
Of roadway?
Yeah, I mean, every township's, I mean, whatever their MFT allocation is, they're spending it each year to maintain the roads.
Okay.
And every community gets MFT money. I mean, even subdivision roads within a community, you can easily have tributary areas over 100 acres.
So then maybe we need to think about revising the exemption, getting Ernest's input and bringing this one back then with that. So noted for that one. Maybe I'll bring all of these back, we can trickle back, but here's the next one, minor culverts. Really the carryover here is that it talks about the modification of the size, shape, and material. You can't do that within a floodway. The general permit does not authorize culvert extensions within a floodway. And then number 5 just talks about really maintaining 90 to 95% of the capacity. And you can do minor adjustments to correct the slope. So the exemption is repair and in-kind replacement of culverts. So again, it indicates that they need to be outside of the designated floodway, allows it for up to 48 inches, is basically 48-inch pipe. And in-kind replacement, again, same shape, material, etc., and includes minor adjustments of the adverse slope. So to me, it seemed like the difference here in the general permit was the general permit would really allow you to do like culvert extensions and things like that. And really the exemption was for the replacement, and then part of the general permit includes that replacement language. So the proposal here was to actually modify the general permit to really remove the replacement language and keep that general permit more as you're extending the culvert or the drain tile, and keep it as a exemption if you want to replace the culvert pipe. And I just took that 90 to 125% capacity and tacked it onto the definition. So this one's a little bit different. We're keeping both. We're keeping the exemption, but we're modifying the general permit because I think, as I mentioned, and I was hoping Ernest would be here again, but you know, Ernest has probably sent me a dozen of these culverts that they've replaced that really are just maintenance. And the other component to this in terms of a before and after is you're probably going to know that there's an existing culvert there. So if it gets replaced differently, you'll probably be able to see that. So it's a little bit different than the pavement replacing were, again, the challenges we talked about, some of those. So this one a little bit different, so I don't know if anybody has any comments related to this one. Again, I'll bring them all back just because they're kind of grouped together, so, all right, great.
So can you run through designated floodway? So that in E, I just want to make sure that we're not.
Designated floodway, so that would be mapped through IDNR. It's designated on the map, so you'd have to go to a map, turn it on, and check to see if IDNR has designated that area as floodway.
So to Steve's point though, it could be 640 acres and not mapped.
Right, but that's why this says designated, so if it's non-designated, then yeah, that would be something that then would come up as part of the permit review, and we'd probably have to indicate to the applicant that it's not designated and have to approach IDNR to make sure that they don't have any issues with it.
So that's a 3708 floodway.
It's a
Under the 3708
Section
floodway rules of IDNR, that's the designated floodway in northeast Illinois.
Yeah, whatever the mapping shows.
Okay.
So it should be a straightforward, like we have the mapping on our aerials, so hopefully that should be enough to indicate kind of where that limit is. If it starts to get close, we usually, anytime, in Spring knows this, anytime you start to get close to these boundaries with federal or state, we then ask the applicant to just get something in writing, an email saying it's not a problem. If we don't have a clear distinction, if we think it's too close. So we do it with Army Corps wetlands. If you're gonna get too close, reach out to them. Otherwise, if you're staying far enough away, we're comfortable. Be the same situation with IDNR, where we feel more comfortable keeping them in the loop than trying to make that distinction.
Yeah, so anything in a designated floodway, you're gonna need to get a floodway permit.
Right.
So it's not probably any more difficult to get the regular permit from McHenry County. You know, so I don't have a problem with that. Because you have to compensate for floodway fill with IDNR OWR for a designated floodway anyway.
Correct. And
so there's gonna be work going on.
And this is something that we would, since it is an exemption, we would potentially not be involved with the idea of the non-designated floodway. If someone replaces it and it turns out that it's non-designated and IDNR potentially would have an issue with it, then it's kind of like one of those things where for us it would be okay. I don't know what IDNR is going to say, but that person would almost have to just answer to IDNR, and we don't really want to be put in a situation where we're also trying to patrol all of IDNR's, non-designated.
You don't have permitting authority.
I don't, right. So that's why we just want to completely stay away. If it's outside of the designated, under our ordinance, you're allowed to do it. It's up to you as the applicant to make sure you're meeting all other state and federal requirements. But again, if we get something, we do like to double check for these folks and let them know if we think that potentially they should reach out to IDNR just to make sure that there's no issues. But, yeah.
Why do you have a limit of 12.6 square feet?
I don't know, it's 48-inch pipe. It probably seemed like if it's any larger than maybe that's something that should get looked at, but I mean, we can remove any limitation.
I didn't want to ask.
No, 12.6 is just over 48 inches.
Okay, just seems.
And I don't know where the other thing is, this 90 to 125 capacity.
That goes back to us.
That goes back to, okay. Because I was like, man, if you did 25% capacity in some of these, you don't even, like, it's almost a 3-inch increase. You don't even get that 3 inches across the board, so it's kind of a weird number. But again, I wasn't trying to eliminate anything or change anything. It was more so just carrying it over. And this gives us the opportunity, though, to nitpick some of this. So if If we feel that we want, I mean, I feel like 48 inches probably covers most. You know, again, we can get Ernest's take, he probably would understand better with all the projects of do we want to increase that number so we can, I'll run it by him. Okay. Then the last one, dredging. Again, same thing with the red language, just trying to identify and showcase the similarities. I think this one, you know, if everyone recalls, we kind of hit on it quite a bit, that it's really saying the same thing. The maintenance of drainage ditches, again, I included the definition of channel and highlighted the word ditch. So this is, again, just so we have something on file and something that Mike mentioned that we did recently with the Hebron Drainage District, is had them come in, draw a quick plan so we knew where they were dredging and issued them a permit under this general permit. So similar ideas, the maintenance of roadway ditches. I'll pull this up a little bit. There's more language in here, but maybe I'll leave it on the general permit since that's the one we're looking to keep. I did try to take a look at this half-a mile component. And I looked at Army Corps and IDNR, and I didn't find a mention in their code, so I'm not sure if this ties in somewhere else. Darren, I thought you had pinned it down last time, actually. You had indicated something for the half mile, and I can't remember.
Yeah, I thought it was DNR had, I could look up.
Because I went to their regional, IDNR Regional Permit 3, you know, for all of that, and I didn't find it in there. Not to say that it might not be in some of their other regulatory components, but I didn't track down where that half a mile is stemming from.
I'm not sure why you would restrict that linearly.
So
bother.
We can, okay, I'll make an indication that it seems
I
like.
don't see the benefit of it.
It's just maybe if it gets too, you know, in this case, since we're gonna be moving to the general permit, if it gets too long or there's issues, we're already looking at it, so it can be brought up. But I'll indicate that we'd like to remove that, so I'll make that change. All right.
It would work better, because we come in and did that job and it's more than a half mile.
Yeah.
And your machine is there, so you want to do more.
Which I think we
did.
I think we issued that under something, you guys didn't have that.
It was 3.
With the drainage district.
Like 3 miles.
Yeah, with the drainage district, you didn't have the restriction or the fee implication, so I think I just gave it to you guys under a regular permit. But yeah,
But if a farmer wanted to do that,
Right.
or a municipality or
Right.
something. So.
Right, that would kick them into potentially a $800 permit, something like that is what you would be looking at, potentially would be ballpark. So, all right, I'll make that change. I'll contact Ernest and get his feedback on some of the roadway components. It sounds like the culvert requirement number 2, we seem to kind of be okay with that one. And I will bring this back, I suppose.
Question?
Yeah.
So do you have a separate definition for roadside ditches, or would a roadside ditch be a drainage ditch?
The only definition, Mike, I have is channel, which includes all of this.
Okay.
So if
just like
we
regular-
want to look at revising some of those definitions, and I see a head shake from Vince, so maybe what I'll do is I'll go through and try to work some of that out and maybe show you all the different definitions and maybe propose some alternatives.
So you want to remove all of dredging from exempted and put it into general permit 1.
Right, because there is that same conflict. But under this too, we would propose to pass a resolution to waive the fees. So really the only burden on the applicant is just to give us a site plan indicating where they're proposing to do the work.
All right, I need to ask a question to Mr. Kearns, because this was kicked back to this TAC committee, and is there another reason here?
Sure, we can bring Jim in.
No, I think we kind of kicked it back
Yeah, they kicked it back to us.
We could not get consensus on this at
Right.
all, on these changes.
I think,
Some of us didn't want the permits, and a couple others wanted the permits that day. We could not get a consensus. That was my opinion of that.
I know, I agree. It was mixed. It seemed like a lot of folks liked the idea of having something, because if we don't have anything, then we don't have necessarily protection for the neighbors, or we can't actively let them know that we've looked at it with the before and the after. And so that was a little bit of a sticking point where people didn't want the permits, but they didn't want to necessarily do away with potentially talking to us to make sure that everything was in order.
And the length of the dredging wasn't the subject that day.
That was, yeah.
Of taking that out.
I think it's a disincentive then a little bit to, like, for HOAs to maintain their ponds. If it's not, and maybe some road districts too, like to go and just do regular cleaning of their ditches, you know, to make sure flow gets through, or even, I don't know how many active drainage districts you have that would do this, but it seems a little bit of a disincentive, not a huge amount, but would you consider like having a cubic yard limit? Like, okay, here's where the project gets gigantic, but if you're just going in with a Vector truck or just some small equipment and you're cleaning out stuff in front of a culvert, you know, on a roadway.
The difficulty with that, and Michael can test what we had, was when farmers are doing this, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't really get a good estimate, because in some areas you're gonna get some, in other areas you're not gonna get much dirt at all. And I don't know that there's a consistent way that someone can give an accurate representation of I'm over or under. Mike, if I kind of surmise that correctly?
That's what we ran into as we went down that ditch. You know, there are areas that we cleaned very little out of, but then there are areas that we cleaned a lot more of.
And
It was, you know, and you're working in the grass too, so it's kind of hard to estimate what's actually in there, so.
You know, I don't know how much of like DOT maintenance that they actually dredge. I think a lot of what they do is cut and like remove debris and all those things, which still falls under maintenance, where this dredging specifically, you're getting a backhoe and actually digging up material potentially. Yeah.
So I guess my point's with yours, do we see value in having these people dredge and get these waterways cleaned up? And if we do, then I think we want to try and not disincentivize them. And I think generally agriculture doesn't want to necessarily open the box, right? So coming to get the GP1, even though you're going to waive the fee, okay, great, but I think it's going to disincentivize them from cleaning out, right? In an HOA or, you know, anybody who's a volunteer, right, that, hey, but we should maintain it. So if we're going to take away it makes sense on the GP1, even if you waive the fee to get rid of the half mile in order to be able to do the bigger projects, or you get a couple of guys together to do the big projects. But that half mile, is that an 80 acre width?
Well, the square footage would then kick in, right?
You don't count, for dredging, you don't count the square footage of the dredging in terms of
Right, so, but if you leave the exemption and do the half mile, basically then if you got one guy that's out there doing his own piece,
yeah,
you know, that half mile is gonna cover it. It's when you get a bigger project across multiple landowners.
Yeah, I will say that I don't see this as like it's gonna draw people away, because those guys that aren't gonna come to us, they never were, even if we keep it or change it. But most people seem to want to come to us to make sure that there's gonna be no issue down the road. That's what we encounter most of the time, is most people want to do it. And anyone that doesn't, they're probably not gonna care what we have to say, and they're probably just gonna end up doing it, whether we make this change or not. And and anyone that's sitting on the fence, I think would prefer from kind of what we see, again, this is just what we see people coming in, most prefer to come in and make sure there's gonna be no issues. So we do see a lot of these, like I said, a lot of the time anyway. In some cases, we can, tell them, or we can kind of go through it and then kind of describe what they're doing, and maybe it's not so much of dredging. We ask, are you gonna have a backhoe out there? No, I'm just gonna go and clean out the stones and things. Well, go ahead and do that. If anyone was like on the fence already or looking to do it, I don't think they're gonna come to us regardless. If that is a potential concern, but.
For the ditch conflict, I think some of the conversations when I sat on here prior was, we'd have one body of government say that they wanted the trees cut off, the other say removed. How do we address this if we're requiring them to go through a permit process?
Well, I think that's where, if they're dredging in an area, then this would allow them to dredge the area and remove that tree debris. I don't, if they're coming in and looking to cut down and pull up the stumps and things like that, we'd probably send them to Army Corps and Spring, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be if it's Army Corps jurisdiction, we'd have to leave that to them to decide. Normally, if it's our jurisdiction, what we would try to take a look at is if it's a potential wetland impact, how many trees are you doing, and can we keep it under 1/10 of an acre, and can you replace the material back to original? And try to really, if they want to remove the whole trunk and everything, try to do that for them. Maybe walk them through some of the limitations or potential impacts. Like if you try to do that root system, you might find yourself in more of a headache than, So we try to have those discussions if it comes in with those folks. And all the time, what we try to do is, since the general permits are cheaper, we'll try to keep it a general permit. If we can avoid any permitting at all, we'll avoid any permitting. If we can avoid Army Corps or IDNR, we'll tell them, here's an option where you can do that. And we just throw it back to the applicants and they make the decision. But we try to work with people to give them solutions like cheapest, quickest, whatever they're looking for. We try to work with them on that. So all of that would still be in place here. This just cleans up the ordinance so there isn't the conflict. So if someone's looking at it, they're gonna say, oh, okay, I just need to give the county my plan and I'll be good. I think if someone's looking to do a project, they're either gonna decide to call us or not. Because they're not gonna open up an ordinance. They're just probably gonna call, like, hey, I'm looking to do a project. And that's how most of our conversations start. And then we go from there. And so this at least would eliminate the conflict of exemption or not. So I'll throw this back to Ernest, but it sounds like we're more or less in line with some of this. Maybe we gotta look at some of the revising the definition. So I don't think this is in a state to send to the board. What I'll probably do is just give them an update, see if anything has changed on their end, and let you guys know.
Spring, does the court have a limit of channel length for dredging?
I want to say it was a half mile, isn't it?
I
I think that's where
I was
thinking that, and then when you were saying DNR, I'm like, well, maybe it's DNR, but it might be the core.
Pulled it, and I did not see anything.
I just looked at DNR statewide 11, which covers dredging, and that is 1,000 feet.
Let me see if Mike's available right now.
So it's
I did-
the streaming stabilization has a maximum width if dredging would be associated with that permit.
Maybe that's the half
So
mile.
that is
500 feet.
That's 500 feet.
500
Yeah,
feet,
that's
yeah.
500 feet.
Unless you get the exemption, correct?
Yeah, I think there's some discretion, but I think the
Yeah.
number in the nationwide is 500.
So I didn't go into, I just checked IDNR Regional Permit 3 and the nationwides because these general permits were supposed to mimic those documents. So there could be, like I said, there could be some other regulatory component where the half mile is pulled from, but which one was? I'll just check this since it's 11:30 and I'll do a couple of announcements. Where was simple charging? Okay.
Dan, do you remember when Darren Smith did his dredging along the Kish, kind of by the hospital there? Wasn't that, didn't he have to have 2 separate permits because he was half mile and then another half mile with the Corps?
I don't
You
recall.
don't remember?
Thought I had it up here. Clearly.
See if Mike gets back to me.
Okay, well, we're looking to eliminate that, so if anybody has concerns of that half mile, we can take a look. All right. So I'll bring that item to a close. Skipped over a couple of sections. I don't think we had public comments since I jumped into the presentation. Any members' comments here before we close out? No, okay. Any future topics? No, okay, so quick announcement for the TAC. I sent emails to everyone that has their TAC term expiring. I basically have heard back from everyone. MCCD is in a little bit of a weird situation where they're gonna have personnel change, so we'll figure that out. Lori, I sent an email to Gabe, but we can talk that a little bit more. Maybe we'll grab Jim real quick. And then Alex, I've not heard from you, so just FYI, did you get my email? Okay.
Yeah.
And then Spring, looking to do that. So, other than that, couple of more announcements. We have our water forum coming up on September 18th. Scott's got some flyers. Scott, do you want to do your quick plug?
Yeah, so, we have our annual water forum. I've talked about it a few times in our meetings, but it's coming up on September 18th. So it's from 5:30 to 8 o'clock at McHenry County College. This year's topic is going to be focused on stormwater. Our keynote speaker is going to be Trent Ford, Dr. Trent Ford. He's an Illinois state climatologist. We will be talking about water quality, MS4, and things along those lines. This year we're upping the amount of food that we're getting. So we have Duke's Ale House cater the event, and upping the amount of food by a third. So nobody will be going hungry this year. But it's a great event. Like I said, Wednesday, September 18th, from 5:30 to 8 o'clock at McHenry County College Auditorium. And so I do have flyers for that. This Friday, we have our next BMP talking tour. And this is on the value of trees for our communities. And part of the focus here is really trying to target elected officials, public works staff. When we talk about trees, most people really don't understand the full benefits of trees. And the decisions we make today affect the quality of life for generations. Our trees are multi-generational. The trees that we have here today are here because of decisions that were made by our grandfathers. So it's really important for our elected officials and decision makers to really understand the full benefits of trees. And the speaker that I brought in, some of you may be familiar with him, but it's Joe Hansen. He's the forester for the village of Wilmette. He's a younger guy, but just a tremendous speaker, and is just very practical, pragmatic, common sense information based on real world examples. So great speaker, highly recommend it. We've got about 40 people signed up already, so it's going to be a great turnout. It's going to be at Trout Valley Lodge on Friday, September 13th, so this Friday from 1 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I do have flyers for that as well. That's all I got.
All right. Anybody else want to say anything before we move to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right. All right. Second on that, Mike? All right.
Where's Trout?
All right, thank you, everyone. As always.
Right by the Fox River. Yeah.